This is a router plane. It's a jig that attaches to the bottom of your router and allows you to level one surface with another surface. We used it to help build this cabinet that the router plane is sitting on. We used it to level the wood trim with the laminate without having to dig into the laminate. We used it to level the wood frame, the face frame, with the plywood panels without disturbing the veneer on the plywood. We even used it to level some of the screw plugs that cover the screw heads. There are three parts to your router plane. There's an elongated sole about 10 inches long that replaces the shorter sole on the bottom of your router. There's a spacer that holds the router above the work. And finally, there's a handle so that you can hold on to the sole, the spacer, and the router itself. Now you'll notice that I made the sole out of 1/4 inch acrylic plastic. This is so I can see through the sole and see what I'm doing. It really helps, it really does. But if you don't have any 1/4 inch acrylic plastic, you can use a 1/4 inch plywood like we did here on the beta test. Time to switch to flash mode. And here it is all together. Now, as you noticed, I put some big friggin' washers between the handle and the sole. That's to help with the balance. If you notice, I let go of this, it doesn't go anywhere. If the router were to tip over like that, the bit would bite into the work, and you don't want that to happen. You may have to use more washers than what I used here, or extend your sole a little bit. If you'd like to see the plans for this router plane, click on the link below and download the PDF that we provided for you. Of course, you're going to have to change the dimensions of the plans to fit your router. And if you're wondering what type of router makes a good router plane, well, almost any router, really. But I prefer these small routers because they're light, they're easy to handle, and you can fit them into tight spaces if you need to. The router that I'm working with is a Porter Cable laminate trimmer. I've been working with Porter Cable routers now for about 30 years, and I really like them. The first thing that we need to do is we need to adjust the height of the router bit. It's got to be just above the surface that we're using to guide the router plane. Now you'll notice that I mounted a 3/4 inch diameter straight bit in the router, and I've kind of eyeballed this so that the tips of the flutes are just even with the surface of the spacer. But I want it actually to be 3/1000 to 5/1000 above the work surface. And I just happen to have a 3/1000 inch feeler gauge right here. I'm going to position the router plane so that the bit is over the dollar bill, but the dollar bill is not pinched between the sole and this piece of scrap MDF. And then I'm going to lower the bit and lower it until there it is. It's captured the dollar bill. The dollar bill is now pinched between the bit and the MDF. Now I'm going to raise this carefully, just a little bit at a time. Come on. There it is, until the dollar bill is free. Now I can be absolutely certain that the router bit is no closer than 3/1000 of an inch to the surface that we're going to work on. One of the best uses for the router plane is to trim one surface even with another. As you see, I've got a piece of plywood that I've covered with laminate, and then I've edged it in birch. Now I want to trim this birch so that it is even with the laminate, but without digging into the laminate. So here we go. Of course, the birch trim isn't exactly even with the laminate. It's 3 to 5 thousandths inches above, but it's close enough that you can get it with just a few swipes of a scraper. Just angle the scraper slightly so that you don't bite into the laminate as much as you're biting into the wood. There. That's nice and close there. This jig is also extremely useful in cabinet making, especially when you're working in plywood. Like right here, we've glued a face frame to a piece of plywood, and then we had to even up the two surfaces between the solid wood and the plywood without digging into the extremely thin veneer that's on the outside of the plywood. To show you how we did it, we've glued a piece of birch here to a piece of plywood. Oh yeah, that is so much simpler than sanding the wood down and trying not to go through the plywood veneer. I'm sure some of you guys remember that old joke where the bartender is making a dry martini and he just sort of whispers the word vermouth over the gin. Well, sometimes I feel that's what's happening in the plywood industry. There's some guy at the end of the line, and as the plywood passes by, he just sort of whispers the word veneer. But a router plane can make it easy to get the wood down to where you want it without going through that whisper of veneer. Get you guys a good product and let you say to yourself when it's all done, nailed it.